They say, how does God know? And is there knowledge with the Most High? Behold, these are the wicked, and always at ease they have increased in wealth. Surely in vain I have kept my heart pure and washed my hands in innocence. For I have been stricken all day long and chastened every morning. So I want to come to Psalm 73. I've been wanting to do this one for a while. I looked at it some time back. We looked at it sort of as a meditation on Sunday morning before worship, but I want to come back and look at it a little more in detail. And we're not going to get through all of the psalm today, as you can well tell by the reading, but we're going to look at the first few verses of this psalm. The focus on Psalm 73 is truth in conflict. Things that we understand and know about God, oftentimes where we have these declarations about his character and who he is, but then when we look at the world, it seems like there's a contradiction, like what we read in Scripture isn't the same in what we see in life and experience, or at least it seems to be, because it's really all about perspective. And that's really what Psalm 73 is about. It's going to deal with the issue of perspective. It's all about our perspective, which brought this story to mind. So I'm going to lay it out for you as we walk into this psalm together. There was a father of a very wealthy family, and he took his son on a trip to the country with the firm purpose of showing him how poor people live. So they spent a couple of days and nights on a farm that would have been considered to be a farm owned by a very poor family. Scratch farm, as they might call it back in the day. And on the return from the trip, the father asked the son, "How was the trip?" "Great, Dad." So the father asked him, "Well, did you learn how poor people live?" The son said, Yes, I did." "So what did you learn from the trip?" asked the father. The son said, "Well, I saw that we have one dog and they had 4. We have a pool that reaches to the middle of our garden and they have a creek that has no end. We have imported lanterns in our garden and they have the stars at night. Our patio reaches to the front yard and they have a whole horizon. We have a small piece of land to live on and they have fields that go beyond our sight. We have servants to serve us, but they serve others. We buy our food, they grow theirs. We have walls around our property to protect us. They have friends who protect them." With this, the father stood speechless at the response of his son. Then the son added this when he said, "Thanks, Dad, for showing me how poor we are." It's all about perspective, right? And oftentimes we look at someone else's life and we think that they've got it so great and grand. But then when we come to the Word of God, we realize that our perspective is off. And that's really what the rest of the psalmist is doing. Asaph is he's going to contend with the issue of looking at the world and looking at the things that they benefit, right? But it's not just about that they have and I don't have. But we'll find from the psalmist that there is a moral aspect to this. The implication for him as he wrestles with this is that I do everything right, I strive to do it right, and yet it just seems like I don't exceed and I don't go anywhere, but yet it seems like the world, especially the rich and the wealthy, they don't care anything about holiness and purity, and yet it seems like they always thrive. Why is that? And it's interesting that as you read through Psalm 73, so I'm going to challenge you over the next few Sundays as we look at it to continue to read through it and ponder on it, but you'll notice his movement. He begins with his eyes on God, and there is this statement, "Surely God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart." Now, his eyes are going to return to God, but it isn't until he makes a detour, because he is going to look at his neighbors. This is the valuation, verse 3. "For I was envious of the arrogant as I saw the prosperity of the wicked." So he establishes the kind of character they are of. They are proud, they are arrogant, and yet they still prosper. Then he's going to turn his eyes to himself, verses 13 through 16. "Surely," verse 13, "surely in vain I have kept my heart pure and washed my hands in innocence." And notice the reference to my heart and then my hands. He starts from the inside works to the outside. The first deals with the issue of motives, my heart pure, and my hands in innocence, his lifestyle. "Surely I have labored in vain to have a pure heart, pure motives for why I do what I do, and a innocent lifestyle, a pure lifestyle. Surely I've done this in vain, because look at the wicked," right? So then his eyes are finally going to come back to the Lord, verses 17 through 28. And I love the conclusion he comes with in verse 28. But as for me, the nearness of God, this is my good. I have made the Lord God my refuge. Now, I'm just going to tell you just a little notation. In my version of the NASB, I don't know why they do this, but you have Lord God. Now, notice God is in all caps. I don't know if you have the same NAS version that I have. It's really strange to me because in Hebrew, this is Yahweh. This is the covenant name of God. And usually, in translations, we have all capital letters, L-O-R-D. Why they do it God in all caps, I don't know. Seems really strange to me, but I'm just going to give you that for a notation if you have the same as I do. But this is the ending of his focus, is the fact that God is his good. So we take this journey with the psalmist. We can sum it up in two strokes like this: walking by sight and walking by faith. So often we find ourselves walking through this life by sight. We see others around us and the things that they have and all of that, and it seems like their wickedness is being rewarded. But sometimes we have to stop and reevaluate because our perspective is off. Because sometimes we think that if I live a right life, a virtuous life, then all of a sudden there's going to be immediate reward in my life. That's not always the case. Right? You look at Joseph. He did the right thing and he fled from Potiphar's wife. Where did it land him? Jail, right? For a few years before he was finally released. So just to say, keep this in mind, because this is the struggle. So we have the soul's conflict, and then we have the soul's conquest. And it's interesting because Martin Lloyd-Jones had written a book, Meditations on Psalm 73, entitled Faith on Trial. So the challenge is, where is our heart today and where is our faith today? But I just have to tell you, this is poetry, okay? One of the blessings I had was in seminary. I took a class in Hebrew poetry. Hebrew is my first love, and so I took a class on Hebrew poetry with David Duell, and it helped me see the Old Testament in a totally different light, and it helped me see the Psalms in a different light. So I have to show you the beauty of this psalm. Okay, so this is the poetic structure of it and the flow of it. We're going to break it down into three main sections, but this is how it flows. First, you have the statement of truth: God is good. It is then returned to at the end. Truth is affirmed. Yes, he is good. He is my good. Okay, and we'll see how good brackets this psalm. The next parallel line is this, and it's actually a contrasting parallelism in this case. Antithetical parallelism, we would call it. So here we have in verses 2 through 14, the psalmist says, poor me, look at the wicked, how they prosper, then look at my life, right? How many times have we been there? Boo hoo 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 hoo. But then all of a sudden, his perspective changes and it's rich me. All of a sudden, he realizes what he truly has, right? In the middle is the shift, verses 15 through 20. New perspectives. It's all about perspective. It's all about how you see life and see the world. But do you see it from God's perspective, right? Or do we see it from our own sinful perspective? So this is the struggle that goes on. He starts off this way, he ends this way, right? But there is this transition in the middle. So we're going to break it up in three parts, and we're going to walk through this. But Van Gemeren expresses the psalm this way. The psalmist deals with his emotions until disorientation brings him to a reorienting vision. Sometimes the Lord lets us go down these pathways so that we can really come face to face with what we really have. So we have been given the privilege of walking with this psalmist. Through this psalmist, he interacts with the reality of his life. And it's important for us to know who wrote the psalm, and this is interesting. Psalm 73. The psalmist is Asaph, but Psalm 73 opens up, if you will, the book, the third book of Psalms, Psalm 73 through 89. It is this collection. And I'll just remind you that, and I'm not going to do it this time, but the Psalter, there is a context. Maybe we'll look at it next week. The Psalter, there's a context. Each psalm fits within that context. We know that there are 5 books that make up the Psalter. There is context to that. So just to say, when you study the Psalms, although we look at them individually, realize that they are a part of a bigger whole. This is a part of Book 3, that, and most of the translations indicate this for us. But Asaph, or Asaph in Hebrew, he authored 12 Psalms, Psalm 50, and then 73 through 83. And Asaph is Haman's brother and Berechiah's son. We find this in 1 Chronicles 6:39. And Asaph, Haman, and Athon, they were all appointed as singers and musicians for the tabernacle and for the temple. So they were a part of the worship team. But Asaph is going to write this in regards to his struggle and life. And it's amazing how he begins and how he ends. But it's interesting because the Psalms, they always help us understand life. And each one has a classification. Now, each psalm, there is a type of psalm. This is a particular psalm, a wisdom psalm we call. It's much like Psalm 1, 32, 34, 37, and 49. But it is put into a lament. The psalmist is lamenting the situation of his life as he looks at the wicked around him. But it is a wisdom psalm. It's meant to teach us something. And it does deal with the two ways of life, the way of the righteous, right, the way of the wicked. So it keeps up that connection, if you will, to Psalm 1, because Psalm 1 introduces us to these types of psalms. Amazing thing about Psalm 73 and all the Psalter is that life is faced. It's not run away from, right? It's faced. But here's what's interesting about Psalm 73. It's going to challenge us to ask some powerful questions in our life. So I'm going to ask you some of these questions. I'm going to challenge you to think on them. And as we walk through the psalm, we will raise these questions as we look at it. But one of the questions is this: what is the ultimate good in life? Or better, if we personalize it for ourselves, what is the ultimate good in our life? What is it that we say when we say life is good when? Right? Life is good when the paychecks come. Life is good when the bills are paid. Life is good, right, when we have work. What is it that you say? Life is good when? We'll see that Asaph is going to expose his heart here as he wrestles, but he's going to come to an amazing conclusion at the end. The other question I have to ask in light of Psalm 73 is this: do you ever make the measure of God's goodness and justice your happiness or the happiness of the ones you love? Now think about this question. Do you ever make the measure of God's goodness and justice your happiness or the happiness of the ones you love? Do you only declare that God is good when things go well for you? When there are perceived blessings in your life, is that the only time that God is good and just? What if you do everything right and it seems like everything goes wrong? Because this is the perspective of Asaph as he looks at this verse 14. For I have been stricken all day long, and chastening is every morning. Seems like I strive to do everything right, and over all I meet is, right? So sometimes we might start to question God's goodness and justice in our life. So ask yourself this question as you walk through here, because, like I say, Asaph's going to go through a perspective change, and maybe we need to as well. The book of Psalms is amazing because it faces life. It doesn't hide from it. It wrestles with all the things you need to wrestle with. Whatever book you look at within the Psalter, whether it's book 2, which opens with this sense of there isn't a straightforward correlation between virtue and reward, nor is the experience of the godly uniformly comfortable. It doesn't always go right for you when you're in the will of God and doing what He wants. But sometimes we sort of live that way, like if I'm in God's will, then obviously everything ought to be flowing just right and everything ought to fall into place if I'm really in God's will. So if things aren't going right, then we start to question. But see, that can't always be the gauge of whether or not we're doing what God wants us to do or not. Because oftentimes, as you look at some of the dear saints who've gone before us, when they are in the will of God, there's nothing but pain and suffering and trials, right? So it's all about our perspective. Book 3 is going to open with raising a blunt question. And it's not directly stated, but it's there indicated in the verses that are established, verses 13 and 14. But here's the question: is godliness worthwhile, or is it just a waste of time? It's really what he gets at in verses 13 and 14. I do all of this, but this is what it seems like every day for me. This is what I face. Is it really worth it? Should I bother? What's the point in playing by the rules, right? I mean, you look at the other side, if you want to look at politics or whatever else it is, but if you look at one side, it seems like they do everything by the rules. This side over here does nothing by the rules, and yet they always seem to win. Is it worth it then to play by the rules? Does the Constitution matter anything? Right? So we look at this in every dimension of our life. My daughter had to wrestle with this in sports. She played against teams that obviously, it was clear from watching the game, and soccer is my sport, I love it. But you watch some of these teams that play and you know they practice cheating. The subtle fouls they do when the ref isn't looking, the way that they can slip them in unnoticed and no one senses them. And sometimes they're just blatant. I remember one game my daughter's running down the field and a girl from the other team grabbed her ponytail and yanked it backwards. So over and over I had to exhort my daughters to learn how to play by the rules but play tough. But sometimes you want to say, you know what, seems like this is what I'm always getting. I might as well jump in and join the game. Seems like every time we do everything by the rules, right? So here's the question. Have you ever been tempted to doubt the value of trying to live a godly life or trying to sacrificially minister to others? Why is it that I give, right? And it seems like everyone else takes. And there isn't this reciprocation that we're supposed to have as the body. There's got to be something wrong here, right? Have you ever struggled with or wrestled with feelings of futility? Why bother? Why bother? All this time, all this effort. So this is the psalmist's issue then as he wrestles with it, right? Since others seem to have all the enjoyments, verses 4 and 5, notice with me. For there are no pains in their death, and their body is fat. They're nice and sleek, and everything looks healthy. Verse 5, they are not troubled as other men, nor are they plagued like mankind. So notice there's a distinction. They're not like everybody else. There is a certain class of people that the psalmist is looking at, the rich at the top, the elite. And this isn't a socioeconomic thing. This is a moral thing, because what the question that Asaph is asking is morality and purity and holiness. Is it worth it? Is it worth it? But we all do that, right? We look at what they go through and they have everything, right? And they break the rules nonstop. And then here we are, we seems like every turn we have is difficulty and trial. Why not just throw in and join the happy majority? Why not just go with the flow, as they say, right? So Asaph is going to be real with us. He is going to expose, and he is open and honest. And I just tell you that he is open and honest with all of his problems. He's going to lift them to the Lord, but he is going to reveal to us the truth is in conflict. And sometimes we have this in our life. Sometimes we don't notice this, but we need to stop and ask ourselves these questions. Because sometimes we think this, right? We know that God is almighty, right? Asaph ends this, verse 28, I have made the Lord God, right? And Lord, if you will, the sovereign Lord, sovereign Yahweh, Adonai Yehovah, is what in Hebrew. I have made him my refuge. He is almighty, right? But then we say, well, if he is almighty, then why does it seem like there are other forces in control than in life? It seems like the world is running rampant and there's no one in control, right, other than these people who are at the top, the elite. Or maybe you have this question, right? Well, how can God be good when life in this world contradicts the fact that God is a loving God, or at least it seems to contradict that? Now, I'm raising all of these questions for you in this issue for Asaph because we need to take the journey with them. So I'm trying to stir our hearts up a little bit and start to question ourselves and our own perspective on life, because the conclusion he comes to, I think, is absolutely amazing. But it's intriguing how he starts the word surely. It starts a tone and sets a tone for the rest of this psalm. We see it again. Verse 1, surely God is good. Notice verse 13, surely in vain I have kept my heart pure. He returns to this again in verse 18. Surely you have set them in slippery places and you cast them down to destruction. Now what's amazing is that when Asaph's perspective is starting to change in verses 15 through 20, it's eschatological. Just think about this for a moment. It is eschatological. Surely you have set them in slippery places. You cast them down to destruction. How they are destroyed in a moment. They are utterly swept away by sudden terrors. Now he is going to talk about the fact that the Lord is going to lead him, right, and receive him to glory. Verses 24, if you notice Psalm 73. With your counsel you will guide me, and afterward receive me to glory. There is an eschatological perspective to this psalm. Eschatological means there is a focus on the end times. There's a focus on the consummation of God's plan. There's a focus on the summing up of everything that God is going to do, the judging of the wicked, and the bringing of the righteous into his glory. There is this perspective, and it's a part of this shift with Asaph. In other words, here's a thought for you. It isn't just about where you are here, it's about where you're going. It's about where you're going. But this word surely sets the tone, and it establishes the pattern for us as he walks through that. And it's interesting because the first main section, verses 1 through 14, is bracketed by this statement of surely. So it brackets this first section for us, and he starts off on a positive note. But then there's a contrast in verse 13. But he begins by asserting with emphasis this truth: God is certainly truly good. It's where he starts. A positive declaration. So it's interesting because not only is he going to talk about his quandary and his perplexity over this, declaring that God is good, but this is also showing us where the ultimate conclusion is going to be reached. And oftentimes the Psalms do this for us. They begin on the note on which they are going to end. In other words, they begin with the conclusion. This is where I'm going to come to. Surely God is good to his people, to those who are pure in heart. And notice the connection of pure heart in verse 1 with pure heart in verse 13. So this is where he is going to end up. This is the declaration of truth. There is a certainty, there is no doubt in this statement. But how many times have we done this in our own lives? Declared this truth about God to be true. God is this. But then when we walk into the world, right, and we start looking at things around us, we start to question the legitimacy of that certainty. It becomes less certain for us. So really the conclusion that Asaph is going to come to in this is that in spite of the appearances, God's providences are just and right. In other words, God truly is good. He is good. It may seem like the wicked are being blessed, but here's the truth. God is good. He is always just and he is always right in everything he does. Right? So that is the mentality then as we wrestle with life and the things in our life. That is the mentality that we are to come with, and goodness is the focus of the psalm. It begins and ends on this. Verse 1, it begins this way. Surely God is good. It's going to end this way in verse 28, that God is my good. So twice we have tov in this psalm, and it brackets the psalm, and it shows us where the focus is. The goodness of God that's being wrestled with here isn't just merely that God is generally benevolent to his creatures. We know this to be true from Psalm 145 verse 9. The Lord is good to all, and his mercies are over all his works. That's not ultimate his concern, that God as creator takes care of his creatures. What he is reflecting on is the fact that there seems to be some sense of blessing and reward for evil behavior. But again, the problem is his perspective is off. How he values these things is off. What he realizes is that in the end of this is that all of the things of the world don't matter. It just matters that I have God. That's his treasure. That ought to be our ultimate good in life. So we can start to evaluate then where that ultimate good lies in our life. What do we pursue? What do we spend most of our time on? What do we spend most of our efforts and energies driven towards? What's interesting is then Asaph is going to be conflicted here, because here is the statement of truth, but then when it comes to the experience, right, and we see this, that it seems like it comes into conflict with this. There's evident suffering for the godly ones, those who seek to live a pure life, and yet the wicked continue to prosper, and there seems to be nothing wrong with them. And this is his personal struggle. This isn't a nation struggle. This is an I struggle. So when you read through Psalm 73, look at all of these statements that he makes. Verse 2, but as for me, but as for me. And over he's going to return to these statements of I, but as for me, but as for me. It's interesting that this phrase is going to occur in the Hebrew text 4 different times. It's not shown in the English, verses 22 and 23. It begins with the same words. Verse 22 and 23, then I was senseless and ignorant. I was like a beast before you. Nevertheless, I am continually with you. You have taken hold of my right hand. So he begins these statements with the same, but as for me, but as for me. And I don't know why the English translators didn't do it that way, but this is how they present it. And he returns to it in verse 28, and that they preserve for us. But as for me, the nearness of God is my good. This is a personal struggle. This isn't about the nation. This is about him and his own life. And I love the fact that the psalmists do that. So often they open up their own hearts to us. Listen to me, this is my struggle. This is what I went through. This is how I saw the world, but this is the conclusion I came to. It's so awesome that they allow us to take this journey with them because they help lead us and guide us. This is where your perspective ought to be. This is where it should be in the end of all that. But I understand what you're going through. If you've been there, I've been there, right, is what Asaph is saying. Look, we've walked this journey together. It's interesting because we see that he is honest about it. And this is a thought to keep in mind, right? Be honest with God with your struggles. Just realize that this is a psalm. So this is a song to be sung by the nation of Israel, by God's people. It was instructive to them. It taught them how to wrestle with these things that seem to be in conflict with the life around them. It teaches us how to deal with these things. It gives us the words to say and how to express ourselves when we have these wrestlings as we look at the world. But it's amazing because he's just open. He's honest with God. And we sing the songs that we can take these things to him in prayer and make them known to him. But it seems like oftentimes when we have struggles, he's not the first one we go to. And I like being there when believers come and they ask questions. Well, how do I deal with this? Or how do I deal with that? And you want to be loving and caring, but sometimes I want to say, did you ask God first? Did you ask God first? Because he has greater understanding than I have, without a doubt. And we have the sympathetic high priest, right? Been there, done that, but sinless. So who better to be there for you than he? Why ask me? Because I'm just a broken pot, right? That the Lord seems to manifest his power and glory through at times with the rest of us, right? But why come to me when you can go to him? So Asaph, he's open with God and reveals his struggle before him. He exposes his pain and his perplexity. And he even talks about the fact that, look, I tried to ponder this thing, verse 16. When I pondered to understand this, I was troublesome in my sight. I just couldn't come to grips with this. I tried to wrestle with it on my own, but I just couldn't come to a conclusion. And so he brings it to God. And the turning point is amazing because I'll just tell you, at the turning point for him, part of it was worship. It was in the context of worship that all of a sudden his perspective was changed. I just have to say that Sunday mornings for me, worship is that for me. It is to be that accumulation of a week long of worshiping God and then the outpouring of it on Sunday morning. But sometimes, right, after a hard week and a difficult week, it's a time for me to get my perspective straight. So he doesn't shy away from the reality of what he sees in wicked people around him, and he sees this and it seems like they're better off. So this is my rendering of it, just to sort of give you the sense of what he's reflecting on, verses 4 and following. They do not suffer pain, they are strong and healthy. Why? Why, when I've given my life to serving the Lord, do I have to deal with all of this pain and misery in my life? Why is it seems like one thing starts to get dealt with and then something else comes and I never seem to get out from under all of this pain and misery? But I've given my life to the Lord. I've surrendered to serve him. And you look at all of these wicked people and the arrogant out there, and they even set their mouth against heaven, right? Verse 9. They do this in audaciousness, and they go about their life, and they prosper, and they flourish, and they have everything taken care of, and their kids don't lack anything. I don't know about you, but I've been there. They do not suffer as other people do. They do not have the troubles that others have. Times you get that, right? We look at the elite in our society, and they live in their gated communities and their guards from the government, right? And their protection, and they live under this, and yet they let everything else fall apart around them. Verse 12, take a good look at these. The wicked, this is what they're like. He says in verse 12, they always have it easy, they're always carefree, and they just keep getting richer and richer and richer. It seems like their wickedness and their arrogance is rewarded. You can sense the frustration that why bother playing by the rules? They have no pangs until death. Their bodies are fat and sleek. They scoff, they speak with malice, loftily threaten oppression. They set their mouths against the heavens. They are nevertheless always at ease, and they increase in their wealth. My life, though, my life, the psalmist says, verse 14, all the day long have I been stricken and rebuked every morning. This is my lot in life. Right? They get to live the life of all the kicks and fun. I get kicks all right, but it's usually in the gut and the teeth. This is what he's saying if I put it in pedestrian terminology. Therefore, he's tempted to conclude that obeying God is useless. It's not worth it. And this, let me just tell you, is where Satan wants us to be. He wants us to think that it's not worth it. Because he knows what the ultimate outcome of the wicked is, and he knows what the ultimate outcome of the righteous is. The righteous partake in the glory of God forever and ever and ever, right? The consummation of all things. The wicked, eternal damnation. No relief, ever. Weeping and gnashing of teeth. Unquenchable fire. This is part of what Asaph is going to transition, because it's not about here that matters. It's about where I'm going in the end. It's an eschatological perspective. I don't live for now. I live for eternity. But so often we find ourselves trying to live for the now and cling to this life here rather than live the eternal life. This is why Paul tells Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 6, as he deals with the issue of wealth, he says, get a grip on the eternal life to which you have been called. You came into this world with nothing. You leave with nothing. Live for eternity, Timothy, not the here and now. And then his instruction to the rich is, they don't store it up for themselves. His instruction is, tell the rich to give. You want to store up a treasure for yourself for the true future? Give. Give. So this is the wrestling that he has, and literally he comes in a contrasting statement. Surely in vain. Surely this is empty. Surely this is futile. Surely it's a waste of time for me to do this. So I leave you with this conflict that he's having. We'll come back next week and look at the last two sections of Psalm 73. But here's exhortations coming out of this first section as we look at Asaph and what he does. The first thing is to know that you need to go to God in your struggle. It's nice to have believers around us, mature ones who have walked with the Lord for a lot of years, and we can go to them, but the first place we ought to go is God. He is the only one who's going to give us the true perspective, right? Asaph, he honestly takes his struggle to God and he lays it out to him. These are my pains. This is what I'm wrestling with. These are the contentions that I have. This is the perplexity. I've tried to make sense of it on my own, God, and I just can't do it. I'm like a dumb ox. Just doesn't fit my reasoning, and sometimes we do that, right? But this is the complexity of God. God is infinite. We're finite. We keep trying to fit an infinite God in a finite box. It doesn't work, right? That's why our perspective needs to change. He says, sincerely I seek to understand, and so he brings this desire to understand. He doesn't throw up his hands and give up, but he finally comes to where he needs to come to. It's not my rationalization and my logic that's going to work it out for me. It's God clearing my eyes to see the truth. He acknowledges the limits of his own ability to reason and to understand, and he understands, I cannot do this on my own. Therefore, he goes to the one whose ways and thoughts are higher than his own. He goes to God. Whatever your struggle is, be honest with God. Tell him, look, I know that the scriptures say that you are good, but then I look at the world and this is not what I'm seeing. Help me understand. Get my perspective straight. Because on my own, I can't do is. And you can have all the education in the world, right? Some people ask, well, but you went to seminary, you went to Bible school, and you studied all these things and figured all this stuff out. No, look at me. I have the same things you do. I have the Spirit and I have the Word, right? And I go to the same God you do, right? We all go there for the answers. So I challenge you, read through Psalm 73. The next couple of weeks we'll look. But the conclusion that he comes to is the most amazing thing, at least in my heart it is. But be willing to take this journey with Asaph as he exposes his heart to us. Dad, would you close in a word?